The rain fell in heavy sheets that blurred the edges of the streetlights, turning the quiet neighborhood into a watercolor of shadows and silver. Marian Hale stood on the porch of the house she had lived in for 30 years, clutching the handle of her old brown suitcase. The cedar siding dripped with water, the wood darkened, the scent of wet earth rising from the flower beds Ethan once planted for her. Above her, the porch light glowed, a steady beacon against the storm. But the doorway was blocked. Amber Cole Hale, her daughter-in-law, leaned one shoulder against the frame. She was dressed immaculately in a pale silk blouse and tailored trousers, as though the storm was a performance staged only for Marian. Her lips were painted in a precise shade of red that never smudged, her hair pulled into a sleek knot at the nape of her neck. In her open palm she held a quiet demand, the keys. Marian's fingers trembled. She looked down at the house key, the one Ethan had pressed into her hand 25 years ago, saying, "You'll never need another home as long as I'm here." Her throat tightened, but she placed the keys in the small blue ceramic dish on the side table by the door. That dish had been a gift from Ethan, bought at a summer market. It still bore the tiny chip on its edge from the day he dropped it carrying too many bags, laughing at his own clumsiness. Amber's voice was low and sharp, cutting through the rain. "Your son left me everything, Marian. The house, the cars, the accounts. $12 million. She paused, her eyes cool and unblinking. "You're nothing now." The words didn't need to be shouted. Spoken softly, they landed harder, carrying the weight of finality. Marian's chest tightened. For a moment, she almost said something, about Ethan, about how he had always promised to look after her, but the words lodged in her throat. The silence was louder than the storm. Amber's hand moved to the doorframe. "You should go. Tonight." The suitcase handle dug into Marian's palm as she stepped backward into the rain. The cold drops soaked through her cardigan in seconds, plastering her gray hair to her face. She turned once, her eyes catching on the warm halo of the porch light. Amber's silhouette remained in the doorway, arms folded, posture unyielding. Then the door closed. The porch light flickered once, briefly, before steadying again. Marian stood frozen on the sidewalk, the sound of rain pounding against her ears. Across the street, a neighbor's window glowed with the faint blue light of a television, but no one looked out. No one saw the humiliation, the quiet betrayal unfolding in the storm. She pulled her suitcase behind her, each wheel dragging through puddles, each step heavier than the last. She didn't know where she was going, only that the house no longer belonged to her, even though every memory inside it carried her name. But as she walked away, something lodged deep in her chest. It wasn't only grief. It wasn't only shock. It was something colder, sharper. A question that demanded an answer. If Ethan left everything to Amber, why had his last conversations been filled with careful promises that his mother would never be abandoned? Marian didn't know it yet, but the truth was already waiting, sealed in a lawyer's office downtown. The storm tonight was only the beginning. And as the porch light glowed steadily behind her, watching her retreat, it carried a secret Ethan had hidden in plain sight, a signal Marian would only come to understand when the time for revenge finally arrived. Dawn came pale and grainy, like paper left in the rain. Marian sat on a cold metal bench at the bus stop with her suitcase wedged between her shoes and a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Her cardigan was still damp at the cuffs. A notification lit her phone. Pierce Law, will reading confirmed, Wednesday, 10 a.m. She stared at the words until the screen dimmed, then breathed out slowly, as if the message itself had offered a hand. By mid-morning she stood at the end of her old driveway, the rain now a mist. A white van idled, lock and key services stenciled on the side in blue. Metal clicks rang through the entryway. At the curb, a gray sedan waited with a discreet magnetic sign, Coleman Realty. The agent, a bird-boned woman in a camel coat, pretended not to measure the porch with her eyes. Amber opened the door just wide enough to fill it. 15 minutes, she said. Medicine, whatever you left last week. I'm changing codes. Marian nodded and stepped inside. The smell of lemon cleaner and wet wool. The small blue dish by the door sat empty, the absence of keys felt heavier than the keys ever had. From the hallway, the locksmith's drill whined, shavings dusted the runner like pale confetti. Just getting a sense of the space, the realtor chirped, already 3 steps into the foyer, gaze lifting, calculating crown moldings. Lovely bones. Amber's smile was professional and tight. We'll talk numbers after the reading. Marian moved past them into the mudroom. The window glass trembled with each drill burst. She reached for the cabinet where Ethan's old varsity jacket lived and paused, the faint electric hum of a device. Above the back door, tucked near the trim, a small black eye watched the room. Nest, with a soft blue ring. She stood under it a moment, feeling observed and, strangely, steadied. You always wanted the house to keep us safe, she whispered, unsure whether she meant Ethan or the camera. Angle Marian could not see. In the kitchen, Amber's phone lay face down beside an untouched latte, vibrating with a message thread. Broker, Range Rover, cash buyer interested. Title transfer after Wednesday. Amber, perfect. Locksmith now. Stager at 3. Want this done fast. She lifted the phone, checked her lipstick in the black screen, and typed, List Lake Furniture 2. I'm not living with his mother's ghosts. Back in the mudroom, Marian folded the varsity jacket into her tote. On the shelf sat a shoebox of photos, summer barbecues, Ethan holding up a crooked birdhouse they never managed to straighten, Marian laughing with a lemon in one hand and a rolling pin in the other. She took the box and, with it, a steadiness that surprised her. The front door thudded as a new deadbolt slid into place. The realtor was already discussing sight lines. Amber's voice carried in smooth, managerial tones about optimizing value. Marian stepped onto the porch. The light above her burned unnecessarily bright for noon, its hum barely audible. She looked up at it, the halo that had lit every late-night return, every quiet worry. If anything's wrong, leave it on. Ethan had said it the week they installed it, smiling, wires and patience in his hands. She had left it on last night because she had nothing else to do. Her phone buzzed again. From Alton Pierce. Mrs. Hale, if you have any concerns before Wednesday, you may stop by today. We're here until 5. Not a form message. A human offer. She rode the bus downtown. At a red light, she caught her reflection holding itself together in the window, hair pinned, cardigan neat, jaw set. She practiced a sentence under her breath, my son promised protections. By the 3rd repetition, the words felt less like pleading and more like remembering a contract. Angle Marian could not see. In a wood-paneled office 3 floors above street level, Alton Pierce set a red-sealed envelope on his desk and called a trust officer at the bank. Stand by Wednesday, he said. If there's a breach, Schedule C triggers automatically. I'll verify. He glanced at a small stack of printed thumbnails, porch, doorway, timestamp. He did not smile. At the bank, Marian learned her meter joint checking, barely a cushion, remained available, larger accounts were frozen pending estate transition. The words sounded clinical, but the teller's eyes were kind. At the pharmacy, the clerk bagged her medication and asked after her son with a softness that stung. On the sidewalk, Mrs. Calloway from 3 doors down called Marian by name and said, We have a couch if you need it. Marian said yes. That evening, in Mrs. Calloway's small den with its crocheted blankets and a ticking mantel clock, Marian opened a thrift store notebook and wrote a list. Porch light, stayed on. Ethan's message? Camera and mudroom, brand? Lawyer, Wednesday at 10. Ask about right to residence? Ethan hinted. Why would he say I'd be okay if he left her everything? She set down the pen when the words blurred. Through the lace curtains she could see, far down the block, a faint golden, her old porch light, still burning as if it had volunteered for a night watch. Across town, Amber poured a glass of white wine she didn't taste, scrolling through a folder labeled Hale, Assets. She drew a neat diagonal through a column that read Donate and wrote Sell. The locksmith's invoice pinged into her inbox. She clicked Paid with a satisfied flick. Marian closed her eyes and listened to the house that wasn't hers anymore hum inside her head, the camera's low thrum, the light's patient glow, the lock's new bite. Tools Ethan had installed to keep his family safe were now keeping score. She didn't have answers yet, but she had Wednesday. The clock on the mantel clicked forward. In the distance, steady as a heartbeat, the porch light kept its post. Wednesday morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low over the city like it carried secrets. Marian smoothed the sleeves of her cardigan in Mrs. Calloway's hallway mirror, tying her scarf with a careful knot. She felt older than she had 2 days ago, but her eyes were sharper, restless. She picked up the same suitcase she had carried into the rain, though this time it held only the shoebox of photos and Ethan's varsity jacket folded on top. When Amber pulled up in the black SUV, the engine purred like a predator at rest. She lowered the tinted window, her tone warm but rehearsed. "Come on, Marian. Let's not make today harder than it already is." Ethan wanted peace. Marian studied her face, flawless in its restraint. She said nothing, only slid into the leather seat that smelled faintly of perfume and new car polish. The ride downtown was conducted in false civility. Traffic crawled, buses hissed on wet pavement. Amber spoke in soothing notes, how Ethan would have wanted them united, how estates were complicated but manageable, how Marian should not worry. Every sentence was polished smooth, but Marian heard the hollow underneath. She folded her hands in her lap and kept her eyes fixed on the city rising through the mist. Angle Marian could not see, on Amber's lap, her phone screen lit with a private message thread. "Broker, buyer ready. Title transfer immediately after the reading. Amber, good. Locksmith already done. Realtor on standby. Lake furniture included." She placed her thumb over the screen, dimming it quickly when Marian glanced sideways. At the next stoplight, Marian caught her reflection in the window glass. Her face was pale, her jaw tight, but in her eyes, something Ethan once called steel hidden under lace. She whispered a line to herself as if practicing for court, "My son promised protections." Amber didn't hear it over the hum of the engine. The SUV turned into the mirrored lobby of a downtown office building. Rain slicked the pavement, making the glass shimmer with fractured reflections of sky. Amber slipped the valet her keys with a practiced flick of her wrist, while Marian held her suitcase close like armor. In the elevator, silence stretched. Amber checked her lipstick in the polished chrome, her voice soft but edged. "When Alton reads the will, I need you calm. Don't embarrass yourself. Or Ethan." Marian's reply was quiet, steady. "I'm not the one selling his house before the ink is dry." For the first time, Amber's eyes snapped toward her, sharp enough to cut. The numbers above the door blinked, 5, 6, 7. Neither spoke again. Angle Marian could not see, 3 floors below, in a conference room facing the alley, a trust officer from Hale Foundation's bank sat waiting. A folder lay open before her, stamped automatic actions, Schedule C triggers. On the first page, in careful print, upon verified breach, initiate immediate forfeiture and transfer. Notify trustee Marian Hale. The elevator chimed. Floor 9. The doors opened to a carpeted hallway smelling faintly of paper and polish. A brass plaque read Pierce Law Offices. Marian stepped out first. Her shoes sank into the thick carpet, muffling the sound of her determination. Amber followed, heels sharp, posture perfect. 2 women, side by side, carrying grief in entirely different forms, one heavy with loss, the other burning with hunger. At the end of the hall, a tall wooden door stood slightly ajar. Behind it waited a man with a red-sealed envelope on his desk, and the truth Ethan had left buried like a fuse waiting to be lit. Marian did not yet know it, but this polite drive, drenched in false comfort and sharpened silences, had brought her directly to the battlefield her son had designed long before he died. And today, under rain and glass, the war for his legacy was about to begin. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. Its walls were lined with heavy shelves of law books, their spines a dark forest of titles that seemed to loom over the table. A long pane of glass revealed the city outside, wet streets, umbrellas drifting like black petals in the rain. Alton Pierce, the attorney, stood when Marian and Amber entered. He was a tall man in a charcoal suit, his hair graying at the temples. His handshake with Marion was firm and deliberate, not hurried or dismissive. He gestured toward the chairs. "Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Cole Hale. Please." Amber moved with fluid confidence, placing her handbag on the table and sitting straight, her posture a studied performance. Marion placed her suitcase beside her chair, her fingers brushing the worn leather handle once before she folded them in her lap. On the table lay a thick binder stamped in gold with Ethan's name, Estate of Ethan Hale. Beside it, a red-sealed envelope sat untouched. Pierce began with the formalities. His voice was even, deliberate, as though he had spoken these words 100 times. He read through the smaller bequests first: stock options reserved for a scholarship program Ethan had dreamed of, small gifts to friends and colleagues, a modest donation to the local community center. Marion's eyes softened at the mention of Ethan's generosity. Amber's gaze never wavered from the binder. Then Pierce turned a page. The room seemed to lean toward him. "To my spouse, Amber Cole Hale," he read, "I give, devise, and bequeath the residue of my estate, including all real property, vehicles, cash accounts, investment accounts, and intellectual property." The words filled the room like a stone dropped in water. Amber exhaled slowly, shoulders sinking as though a weight had finally lifted. A faint smile tugged at her mouth, subtle but triumphant. Her hand slid across the table toward her handbag, almost possessive. Marion's throat tightened. She kept her eyes lowered, tracing the grain of the wood with her gaze. Ethan's words sounded like betrayal, but deep inside, she remembered the promises he had whispered in those last hospital nights. "You'll be safe, Mom. I made sure of it." Amber leaned back in her chair, smoothing the sleeve of her blouse, and whispered just loud enough for Marion to hear, "As it should be." Pierce did not respond. He cleared his throat and placed his hand on the red-sealed envelope. The wax gleamed under the overhead lights. "This," he said, his tone shifting, "is Schedule C. A conditional section prepared at Mr. Hale's instruction. It is to be read only after acknowledgement of the residue clause." Amber's head tilted slightly, her brow furrowing. "Conditional," she repeated, the word unfamiliar on her tongue. Marion lifted her eyes for the first time since the reading began. Her gaze fell on the envelope, unopened, patient, like a locked door waiting for the right hand to turn the key. Something flickered in her chest. Not hope exactly, but recognition. Amber, sensing a change in the air, forced a smile. "I assume it's a formality," she said lightly. Ethan was a practical man. Pierce did not answer. His fingers rested on the envelope, unmoving, as though he understood the gravity of the moment better than either woman. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city, low and distant. Marion's pulse quickened. She thought of the porch light burning against the storm, the camera's unblinking eye, Ethan's careful silences in his final weeks. For the first time since his death, she felt he was in the room, not in memory, but in design. Amber crossed her legs, impatient. "Well? Read it." Pierce looked at Marion, then at Amber. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but heavier than before. "Very well. But I should warn you, this is not a formality. It is the part Ethan spent the most time crafting." The seal cracked under his hand. The sound was small, but it carried like a gunshot in the stillness. Marion's breath caught. Amber's smile faltered. And as the first line of Schedule C formed on Pierce's lips, the residue clause that had seemed so final a moment ago began to unravel like thread pulled from the hem of a garment. The red wax split with a crisp pop, and the room seemed to draw one quiet breath with it. Pierce eased a single stapled packet from the envelope and flattened it on the table with the kind of care people reserve for fragile things and dangerous ones. "Schedule C, Conditional Dispositions," he read. His tone didn't change, but the air did. Outside, the rain stitched fine diagonal lines across the glass. Inside, Amber's smile thinned to something engineered. Pierce began at the top. Section 1, Right of Residence and Care. His eyes flicked to Marion, just once. Mr. Hale grants Marion Hale a life estate in the primary residence. She may live there exclusively as long as she chooses. Utilities and reasonable maintenance are to be paid from estate income. Amber made a small, involuntary sound, half scoff, half swallow. He never told me that, she said, aiming it like a test. He wrote it, Pierce replied, not unkindly. He kept going. Mr. Hale further directs that his mother shall not be, quote, directly or indirectly caused to vacate, demeaned, or deprived of her dignity in her home, especially within the first 90 days following my death. End quote. Marian's hands tightened around the edge of the table. The words landed like a hand at the small of her back, steadying her. Section 2, Support Stipend, Pierce read. A monthly amount, enumerated in Appendix A, adjusted annually for cost of living, paid on the first business day each month. Amber found her voice, lacquered but strained. So I'm supposed to fund her? The last word came out sharper than intended. It is the decedent's instruction, Pierce said. He turned a page. The paper whispered. Section 3, Conduct within protected period. For the first 90 days, the spouse is to avoid actions that, in Mr. Hale's phrasing, convert the home into an asset pipeline, such as listing the property, altering access, or introducing third parties for valuation. His gaze was neutral. There are exceptions for safety and necessity, of course. Amber's jaw worked. He was a sentimental man, she said, voice pitching brighter. He didn't understand how estates, real life, work. He understood more than most, Pierce said, mild as rain. He set a fingertip on the margin where a blue tab marked a paragraph. There's a final section outlining what happens if sections 1 or 2 are violated. We'll return to that. A beat of silence. The city hummed beyond the glass. The overhead light held steady. Amber leaned back, lids lowered. Then we're finished. She reached for her bag as if to cinch the scene closed. You've acknowledged my residue, and we've heard the ceremonial part about civility. Marian's eyes were on the packet. She felt Ethan in the space between the words, his neatness, his habit of making a structure hold more weight than it looked like it could. There's more, she said softly, not as a question. There is, Pierce said. He set the packet down, palms open beside it, easing the room back from the cliff. Schedule C isn't ceremonial. It's a system of simple measures aligned with Mr. Hale's stated intent: protect his mother from upheaval, and invite his spouse to show good faith in the period of greatest strain. Amber smiled with only her teeth. And if your measures say I wasn't sufficiently gracious? You revoke the funeral? She let out a small, brittle laugh and turned her face toward the window, as if the city might nod back. Miss Colehale, Pierce said, and the shift to Ms. was precise, we don't assess graciousness. We read facts. He reached into a manila folder and, without drama, slid out a slim stack of prints. Marian saw only the backside of glossy paper and the silver staple in the corner. Her pulse tripped. Amber's chin lifted a fraction. What is that? Documentation Mr. Hale's devices produced automatically, Pierce said. He was methodical. He left us a timeline. Amber's hand flattened on the table. You're bluffing. Pierce did not answer the accusation. He placed his thumb against the stack's top edge, as if measuring how much light to let in. Before we look, he said, and his voice softened in a way that reminded Marian faintly of a nurse in a hard ward, I want to be clear about the spirit here. These provisions were not written to punish. They were written to align behavior with love. Amber's mouth twitched, something like a laugh, or a flinch. Love, she repeated, and the word sounded like a shard in her teeth. The room waited. The clock in the hall clicked once. A cab hissed through water 9 floors below. Marian could feel the porch light in her memory, steady, unblinking. If anything's wrong, leave it on. She had. She didn't know, until this moment, that Ethan had meant it literally. Proceed, Amber said, voice low. Pierce nodded. He fanned the top photograph toward himself and then, deliberately, turned it so they could both see. He did not speak yet. He let the image fill the air first, as if allowing the camera to testify before the lawyer did. Marian's breath stilled. Amber didn't blink. Between them, on glossy paper, a doorway glowed with a familiar halo of light, rain stitched into silver lines, and two figures framed in that hard, merciless truth a lens provides. And the seal, once broken, kept breaking. The photograph lay in the center of the table like a quiet accusation. Its colors were muted but unmistakable, the Hale porch bathed in yellow glow, the storm pouring sideways, Marian with her suitcase just at the edge of the step. And in the doorway, Amber, one hand braced against the frame, her lips parted in the precise shape of the words that still echoed in Marian's bones. "You're nothing now." Amber's breath caught. "That," she began, her voice climbing. "That's out of context." Pierce's tone didn't shift. He slid another page from the stack, a transcript beneath the same timestamp. The Nest camera's microphone had picked up every word, rain and all. "You're nothing now." Printed in neat, impartial font. Amber's face flushed, but she forced a brutal laugh. "Do you know how many times I said things I didn't mean?" He wasn't even there to hear it. Pierce cut in gently. "But the house was. And by his design, that makes it binding." He placed a second piece of paper on the table, an invoice from Lock and Key Services, dated 2 days after Ethan's funeral. Change of locks. Emergency call. Paid in full. Amber's fingers twitched toward it, then froze. "And this," Pierce continued, sliding forward a realtor's preliminary contract. "Call logs from the protected period. A listing prepared within the first week. Optimizing value, I believe was the phrase used." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy, pulsing with everything unspoken. Marian's chest rose and fell, the words on the page burning into her memory. Her son had anticipated this. He had known, in ways she hadn't dared believe. She felt a tremor in her hand but didn't hide it. For the first time since Ethan's death, her trembling wasn't fear, it was vindication, sharp and trembling with weight. Amber snapped, her voice sharp now, no longer wrapped in civility. "You can't possibly strip me of everything over household disagreements. Over grief." Pierce lifted the final sheet, a log of the porch light itself, its circuitry wired into a separate breaker, recording outages and flickers. "On the night you forced Mrs. Hale from her home," he said, "the porch light cut out for 19 minutes. Battery backup recorded it. A breach, verified." Amber's lips parted, her composure shattering. He wired the light." Marian's throat tightened. Ethan's words surfaced, tender and sharp, "If anything's wrong, leave it on." He hadn't just meant comfort. He'd meant evidence. Amber's chair screeched back, her voice pitching into panic. "This is insane. He set me up. He didn't trust me." Pierce didn't raise his voice. "He gave you a chance. 90 days. A very simple test, protect his mother, honor her presence, preserve the home. Instead, in less than a week, he tapped the stack of documents with one finger, steady and deliberate. You breached every clause." The room felt colder suddenly, though the rain had stopped outside. Marian sat rooted, her eyes fixed on Amber. For days she had carried humiliation like a stone in her chest, believing Ethan had abandoned her. Now, with each sheet of paper, the stone cracked. What spilled out wasn't triumph, it was grief, sharpened by justice. Amber pressed her palms flat to the table, leaning in as if force could change law. "This can't be final. You can't make this final." Pierce straightened the papers into a neat pile. His voice was calm, almost soft. "Mrs. Colehale, you don't have to believe me. You only have to believe the document your husband signed. And in that document, the consequences are already written." Amber's face drained of color. Her gaze darted to Marian, searching for weakness, for pity, for anything. But Marian's eyes, still damp, still red from days of loss, met hers with something Amber had never seen before, steady, unflinching strength. The clock in the hall clicked again, each second louder than the last. Amber whispered, hoarse now, What happens next?" Pierce folded his hands. "Next," he said, We moved to Section 3. And though he hadn't yet read the words, the silence in the room told Marion that whatever came after was no longer about Amber's control, it was about Ethan's design, unfolding exactly as he had intended. The porch light had blinked, and in that blink, Amber's world had already begun to collapse. The words hung in the air like the echo of a gavel. Section 3. The very line Ethan had left waiting, coiled and silent, until it could spring alive. Pierce unfolded the final page of the packet, his hands steady. His voice, when he read, was quiet but unyielding. Section 3, Forfeiture on breach. Should my spouse violate Sections 1 or 2, her entire interest in the residue shall be forfeited and shall pour over to the Hale Foundation, a charitable trust, with Marion Hale named as initial trustee. This clause is self-executing upon verified evidence of breach. Amber went very still. For the first time since the reading began, her posture broke, her shoulders dipped forward, her hand gripping the edge of the table as if it could hold her up. Self-executing, she repeated, the syllables jagged. Yes, Pierce said. He closed the binder softly. That means the forfeiture is not dependent on a court ruling. It activates automatically, with evidence already confirmed. The law recognizes the trigger as fulfilled. Amber's voice spiked. You're telling me I've lost everything, the house, the accounts, the cars, because of a porch light and a locksmith? Pierce did not flinch. Not because of a porch light. Because of your conduct. Mr. Hale gave you clear instructions. You ignored them. Amber rose abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. No. No, this isn't possible. He wanted me to have everything. Marion, who had sat silent through the storm of paper and words, finally lifted her head. Her voice was soft but carried through the room. He wanted you to choose. To prove you could honor him by protecting me. Amber's gaze snapped to her, raw and trembling. You don't know that. Marion's hands tightened around her shoebox of photos resting on the floor. She didn't answer, not with words. The steadiness in her eyes was enough. Angle Marion could not see, 3 floors below, in the trust office, a banker's screen refreshed, estate accounts, transfer to Hale Foundation, pending execution. A tow service received a digital dispatch. A clerk printed title change forms for the Hale residence. The system Ethan had built was already in motion. Back in the conference room, Amber's phone vibrated on the table. She grabbed it, fumbling with the screen. A string of notifications flashed, transfer reversed. Account frozen. Vehicle access revoked. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Outside, a metallic groan rose from the street. Marion and Pierce turned to the window in time to see a tow truck back into the curb. Its hook latched onto the gleaming SUV that Amber had driven them in. The dashboard lights flickered once, then went dead as the estate's system shut off access. Amber stumbled toward the glass, palms pressed against it. No, 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 her voice cracked. That's my car. It was your car, Pierce corrected softly. As of 5 minutes ago, it belongs to the Hale Foundation. Amber spun around, eyes wild. You're all in on this. You and him, she jabbed a finger toward Marion. You think you've won because you played victim. Marion flinched at the venom but didn't retreat. She folded her trembling hands in her lap. I didn't play anything. I was only surviving. Amber's fury collapsed into something smaller, sharper, fear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What happens to me now? Pierce stacked the documents neatly, aligning the corners. You will receive a modest transition stipend, as outlined. Enough to resettle, if you wish. But the residue, the house, the funds, the vehicles, the investments, belong now to the foundation. Trustee, Marion Hale. Amber's eyes darted between them, searching desperately for a loophole. But the trap had already sprung. Ethan's words had closed around her like steel jaws, not with malice, but with inevitability. The conference room was silent but for the faint ticking of the clock in the hall and the muffled clank of chains outside as the SUV was pulled onto the tow bed. Marian sat very still, her pulse a steady drum in her ears. She felt no triumph. Only the strange weight of justice, cold, exact, and irreversible. The self-executing trap had done its work. And Amber, for all her calculation, had walked straight into it. The storm outside had softened into a mist, the city below blurred behind a veil of gray. In the conference room, silence hung like smoke after a fire. The stack of documents sat in front of Pierce, tidy and immovable. Amber's breathing was ragged, her hands trembling over the table's polished surface. Pierce cleared his throat and reached for a different envelope, thinner than the others, sealed in plain white. His movements slowed, as though the moment demanded reverence. "There's one more item Mr. Hale left," he said quietly. "A personal letter." He instructed it be read aloud after Schedule C. Amber's head jerked up, eyes wide. "A letter? To me?" Pierce nodded, breaking the seal with deliberate care. He unfolded the single sheet of paper, Ethan's handwriting covering it in neat lines. He began to read. "Amber. If you are hearing this, then I am not. I wanted to believe the best of you, as I always tried. That's why I gave you the simplest test I could imagine: be decent to the woman who raised me, at least for 90 days. If you could honor her, you would honor me. But if you could not, then my love for you would be appetite, not trust. And trust is what sustains a legacy." Amber's lips parted, her face draining of color. Pierce continued. "Mom, if you are holding this, then the worst happened, and I had to plan for it. You may not believe it now, but I trusted you to carry what mattered most, our name, and the mission of the foundation. This trust will fund scholarships for kids like me, first-gen coders who only need one break, and respite programs for caregivers who spend their lives giving without rest. If Amber passed the test, she would share it with you. If she failed, you would know she was never meant to hold it. Either way, the foundation survives." Marian's throat constricted. She pressed her fingers to her lips, Ethan's voice in every stroke of ink. Amber leaned forward, desperate. He wanted me to co-run it with her. He wrote that. That was his intent." Pierce's eyes didn't waver. "Only if you passed the test. You didn't." Amber slammed her fist on the table. "You're twisting his words." Marian looked up, eyes wet but steady. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with grief sharpened into clarity. "He trusted you, Amber. Trusted you enough to give you the chance to prove who you really were." Amber's voice cracked. "I loved him." "Love isn't proved in words," Marian whispered. "It's proved in what you protect when no one is watching." Amber's gaze fell to the letter again, her shoulders curling inward. For the first time, she seemed small, not powerful, not sharp, but cornered by her own reflection. Angle Marian could not see. In the bank office downstairs, the trust officer signed the final authorization. Screens blinked, transfer complete. Hale Foundation funded. Trustee, Marian Hale. A new account lit up, carrying Ethan's vision into life. Pierce folded the letter and slid it toward Marian. "This belongs to you," he said softly. Marian accepted it with trembling hands, pressing it to her chest. The paper smelled faintly of ink and cedar, as if Ethan had been in the room only yesterday. Amber's voice dropped to a whisper, brittle and desperate. "There must be a way back. Something. Anything." Pierce shook his head gently. "Mr. Hale's provisions are airtight. He knew how to write code, and he wrote this estate plan the same way, no back doors, no shortcuts." Amber slumped back, her eyes unfocused, the fight draining out of her. Marian sat still, Ethan's words echoing in her heart. The betrayal that had crushed her 2 nights ago had shifted into something new, not victory, not vengeance, but the bittersweet justice of a son who had loved carefully enough to prepare for this very day. The letter lay warm against her chest, and for the first time since his passing, Marian felt she wasn't abandoned at all. Ethan was still guiding her. Amber, meanwhile, was left to face the truth in silence. She had failed the simplest test of love, and in failing it, had lost everything. "You sad?" Amber sat stiff in her chair, the silence of the room closing in like a noose. Her manicured fingers drummed on the tabletop, restless, searching for an opening. Then, as if a switch had flipped, her eyes lit with sudden defiance. "I'll contest it," she said, her voice sharpening. "You can't expect me to just roll over while his mother takes everything. A judge will see this for what it is: manipulation. Emotional blackmail." Her words cracked the air like glass. Marian flinched, but Pierce only straightened the papers before him, aligning them into a neat stack. He had expected this. "Mrs. Cole-Hale," he said, his tone level, "your husband expected this as well." He turned to the final page of Schedule C. His fingertip traced the last paragraph before he read aloud. Section 4, No Contest. Any legal challenge by my spouse to the provisions of Schedule C shall result in immediate forfeiture of the transition stipend, as well as any temporary allowances provided upon my death. She will receive nothing. Amber froze, her bravado faltering. "What?" Pierce repeated, calm but firm. "If you contest, you lose even the stipend designed to help you resettle. Everything, gone." Amber's face twisted. That's illegal. You can't disinherit a spouse completely." Pierce folded his hands. "Your husband anticipated pressure. He structured this as a conditional gift. You already triggered forfeiture of the residue by breach. The stipend is mercy, not obligation. Mercy you forfeit if you fight." Amber's lips trembled. She looked at Marian, her eyes wild, pleading for sympathy. "He's making me destitute. Do you want that, Marian? To see me ruined?" Marian's hands gripped the letter in her lap, Ethan's words still vibrating in her chest. She swallowed hard. "I didn't want this. I only wanted a place to live. You chose the rest." Amber's mask cracked, tears welled, hot and furious. She turned back to Pierce. "If I sign the acknowledgement, I keep the stipend?" "Yes," Pierce said. "A modest monthly sum. But you must agree not to contest. That's the condition." Amber's chest heaved as she weighed her dwindling options. Her mind raced through the life she had already planned, the buyers lined up, the furniture appraisals, the luxury travel she had promised herself. Each vision evaporated, replaced by a stipend barely large enough to maintain appearances. Her hand shook as Pierce slid the acknowledgement form toward her. "Sign here, if you accept." Amber stared at the pen. The silence pressed down again, broken only by the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Outside, the tow truck rumbled away with her SUV, chains clinking like a funeral bell. At last, she grabbed the pen and scrawled her name in jagged strokes. The ink blotched where her hand trembled. "There," she hissed, shoving it back across the table. "Satisfied?" Pierce gathered the signed page with calm efficiency. "I'm satisfied that your husband's wishes have been honored." Amber slumped back, her shoulders collapsing inward. Her eyes darted again toward Marian, searching for pity, but Marian's gaze was distant, locked on the folded letter she clutched as if it were a lifeline. Amber whispered, broken now, "He set me up. He never trusted me." Pierce met her eyes, his voice quiet. "No, Mrs. Cole-Hale. He trusted you with a chance. You showed him who you were." Amber's lips parted, but no sound came. She pressed her hands over her face, the sound of her sobs muffled, shallow. Marian, meanwhile, felt her own tears rising, not for Amber's loss, but for Ethan's foresight, the careful architecture of love disguised as law. The last gambit had failed. There was no way forward for Amber but the narrow road Ethan had left her, a stipend, silence, and the knowledge that greed had destroyed her. And for Marian, there was only the beginning of a heavier path, one she had not chosen, but one Ethan had trusted her to carry. The air outside the law office was sharp with mist, the kind that clung to coats and hair. Amber rushed through the glass doors first, heels striking hard against the marble floor, her phone clutched like a lifeline. Notifications still poured in, funds transfer reversed. Accounts frozen. Vehicle title revoked. Each buzz felt like another floor dropping beneath her feet. Marian followed slowly, her suitcase in one hand, Ethan's letter pressed close against her chest. She did not rush. She didn't need to. The storm that had cast her out of her home had passed. Now, step by step, she was walking back into the life her son had secured for her. Outside, the tow truck turned the corner, Amber's black SUV chained to its bed. She stopped dead on the courthouse steps, her voice breaking. "That's mine. That was my car." Pierce, exiting behind them, shook his head gently. "It belongs to the foundation now. As does the house." Amber spun toward Marian, desperation cutting through her anger. "Tell him to stop this. Tell him you don't want the house. Please, just let me keep it. I'll give you the guest room, the stipend, anything you want." Marian's fingers tightened on the letter. The memory of that night returned in a flash, Amber standing in the doorway, arms crossed, voice like ice, "You're nothing now." The sting of rain on her skin. The humiliation of dragging her suitcase into the dark. Her reply was calm, almost tender. "No, Amber. I don't want a room. I want my home." Amber's mouth opened, then shut. Her knees wavered as if the steps beneath her had turned to glass. Pierce placed a steady hand on Marian's arm. "Shall we?" They walked together toward the waiting sedan. Amber remained frozen on the courthouse steps, her figure small against the sweep of the building, watching everything slip away in real time. By evening, Marian stood once more on the Hale porch. The brass plaque beside the door had already been polished by the foundation's contractors. Hale House, residence of Marian Hale, life estate. The key in her hand slid easily into the new lock. Not Amber's lock. Hers. The door opened, and the scent of lemon oil and fresh paint drifted out. Volunteers from the foundation moved quietly through the rooms, carrying in boxes of files, scholarship forms, and grant applications. The house that had been stripped for sale 2 days earlier now pulsed with new purpose, the air alive with Ethan's vision. In the kitchen, a young woman with a laptop smiled as she stacked folders near the fruit bowl. "Mrs. Hale? These are the first scholarship applications. First-gen coders, just like Mr. Hale wanted." Marian nodded, her throat too tight for words. She set her suitcase down in the hallway and touched the doorway trim with trembling fingers, grounding herself. She wandered into the living room. Ethan's photograph stood on the mantel, his grin wide, his eyes alive. She reached out, brushing the frame. "You kept your word," she whispered. Behind her, laughter rang from the volunteers unpacking. It didn't sound intrusive. It sounded like life returning. Across town, Amber sat in a rented cab, staring out at the neon glow of the city. Her phone buzzed one last time, estate stipend confirmed, monthly transfer $3,000. The number glared at her, pitiful compared to the millions she had already spent in her mind. She pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle the sob that broke free. That night, Marian stepped onto the porch. The light above glowed steady, humming faintly, watching over her as it always had. She stood under it, the letter still pressed to her heart. For the first time since Ethan's passing, she exhaled without fear. The home was hers again, not by gift, but by justice. Not by pity, but by Ethan's careful design. The eviction had reversed. And this time, the lock clicked shut with her inside, safe at last. The next morning, the Hale house was alive again. Sunlight cut through the windows, glinting off freshly polished surfaces. The volunteers had cleared away dust sheets and stacked files neatly in the dining room. The home that once echoed with tension now carried the quiet rhythm of work, pens scratching, keyboards tapping, low voices trading plans for scholarships and caregiver grants. Marian sat at the kitchen table, her cardigan button crooked, glasses perched low on her nose as she reviewed a grant application. A girl named Rosa, barely 20, had written about coding at laundromats while her mother worked double shifts. Marian traced the words with her finger, tears pricking her eyes. This was Ethan's heart, printed in black ink. The phone on the wall rang, its jarring sound slicing through the comm. Marian answered softly, "Hale residence." On the other end, a voice cracked with bitterness, You think you've won, don't you? It was Amber. Her words were brittle, hollow. I hope you're enjoying your little victory. But remember this, I loved Ethan. You? You just leeched off him. Marion closed her eyes. The insult should have stung, but it didn't. Not anymore. She answered in a low, steady tone, I don't need to fight you, Amber. You already lost. Not because of me, because of yourself. There was silence. Then the line went dead. Across town, Amber's life unraveled quietly. Realtors stopped returning her calls, brokers withdrew their offers, and the luxury circles she had once boasted of turned cold. Without the Hale estate to anchor her, she was just another widow with debts and a reputation for greed. Her phone buzzed again. A notification, stipend transfer $3,000, Hale Foundation. The number glared at her like a taunt. She had imagined millions, yachts, endless travel. Instead, barely enough to cover rent in the city she thought she owned. She hurled the phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. But no sound followed. No apology. No rescue. Just silence. Back at Hale House, Marion pressed on with the work Ethan had begun. In the living room, she signed the first check for a caregiver respite grant. Her hands shook as she placed her name, Trustee, Marion Hale, at the bottom of the page. It felt surreal, her signature carrying the weight of Ethan's legacy. A volunteer asked gently, Would you like us to schedule the next board meeting, Mrs. Hale? Marion nodded. Yes. And please, make sure Rose's scholarship is approved first. Ethan would have wanted her to go to college before anything else. As they spoke, the porch light flickered softly, just once, like a reminder. Marion turned her head, smiling faintly. The light no longer felt like surveillance or evidence. It felt like Ethan watching over the house he had designed to protect her. Amber sat alone in a rented studio, the silence pressing on her like weight. She stared at her reflection in the cracked screen of her broken phone, makeup smeared, eyes hollow. No one called. No one cared. For years she had equated love with possessions, status, the ability to command. Now, stripped of everything, she had only herself, and the silence her greed had earned her. She whispered into the empty room, He set me up. But the words bounced back from the bare walls, sounding small and pathetic. There was no audience left to believe her. That night, Marion placed Ethan's letter on her nightstand. She read the last line again before turning out the light, Love is different than appetite. Trust is what sustains a legacy. The house creaked softly, its old bones settling. Outside, the porch light shone steady, a quiet lighthouse in the dark. Amber's calls had turned into silence. Marion no longer needed to answer. And in that silence, Ethan's voice felt louder than ever. The week passed with an almost surreal calm. Where there had been shouting and locks changed, now there was the hum of printers, the shuffle of papers, and the quiet murmur of volunteers. Hale House had transformed, not into the showroom Amber once imagined, but into the beating heart of a mission Ethan had sketched long before he died. On a cool evening, Marion stood on the porch, cardigan wrapped tight, watching dusk gather in the trees. The brass plaque gleamed under the new lanterns, Hale House, residence of Marion Hale, Life Estate. She touched the letters with trembling fingers, proud and humbled in equal measure. Behind her, the dining room table was covered in scholarship files and caregiver grant requests. She had approved 3 that day, Rosa, the laundromat coder, an older man caring for his wife with dementia, and a single mother studying at night. With every signature, Marion felt Ethan closer, as if he were in the next room, nodding. The porch light above her head glowed steady. It was the same bulb that had watched her humiliation, the same beam that had captured her eviction, the same light Ethan had wired to protect her. Now, it felt different. Less like evidence. More like faith. Across town, Amber sat in her one-bedroom rental, staring at the wall. The stipend notification had pinged again, $3,000. She didn't even open the message. The world she had imagined, yachts, luxury trips, endless applause, had shrunk to the size of a cracked phone screen and an empty wine glass. She replayed the lawyer's words in her head. He gave you a chance. 90 days. You failed in less than a week. The truth gnawed at her, not because it was unfair, but because it was undeniable. Amber whispered to the silence, he trusted me, and I failed him. The words dissolved into the stale air. No one was there to argue otherwise. That night, Marian returned to the porch after the volunteers left. She held Ethan's letter in her hands, the paper soft now from so much folding. She read the last line again, if anything's wrong, leave the light on. Her throat tightened. He hadn't only meant danger. He had meant trust the light, it will guide you back. She stepped closer to the switch by the door. Slowly, she flicked it off. Darkness pressed in, soft but heavy. She waited a beat, then flicked it on again. The bulb hummed, bright and steady, as if answering. She did it twice more, the old signal she and Ethan had shared in his college years whenever he stayed out late, I'm home. Are you awake? She stood there, smiling through her tears. I'm awake, Ethan. I'm here. And I'll keep it on. Inside, the house breathed with new life. Scholarship letters waited to be mailed, grants ready to be delivered, and volunteers eager to carry Ethan's vision forward. Marian walked through each room slowly, touching walls, shelves, frames, the very bones of the home Ethan had fought to keep hers. In the den, she paused at his photograph on the mantel. His smile seemed almost alive in the lamplight. You gave me more than a house, she whispered. You gave me the strength to stand. And the chance to finish what you started. Across the city, Amber finally turned out her own light. The room was silent, her reflection blurred in the dark window. Her greed had given her nothing but shadows, while Marian, the woman she had tried to cast out, stood bathed in the glow of a porch light that would never turn against her. On the porch, Marian lingered, watching moths circle the bulb. She closed her eyes and let the glow wash over her face. For the first time since Ethan's passing, she felt safe. Not triumphant, not vengeful, safe. The porch light burned on into the night, steady and patient, a lighthouse for a legacy built on love, trust, and the quiet power of justice. And this time, when it flickered, it wasn't evidence. It was Ethan, reminding her, you're home.